The God who really sees. Genesis chapter 16, verses 1 through 16. Sarai and Abram were not getting any younger. Abram was 85 years old, Genesis chapter 16, verse 16, and Sarai was 74, Genesis chapter 17, verse 17. But Sarai had a plan. She suggested taking a concubine for her husband so that a baby by her husband and the maid would be considered Sarai's child. Genesis chapter 16, verses 1 through 3. In the end, no one was happy, especially Hagar. Hagar lived a more miserable life than before because her status changed, but her suffering did not. What happens when we use human solutions to replace God's way to a better life? How does God want us to live even when the quality of life is not ideal or improving? Why is it better to trust God even at the worst of times? First, living your life through others is fooling yourself and others. Genesis chapter 16, verses 1 through 5. Sarai thought that she could live her life through Hagar, that she could build a future on an abnormal relationship, and that her husband and the family would be happier and complete with kids at home. Abram and Hagar did not protest the plan. Abram, on the one hand, wanted his wife happy, their marriage to work, and a baby to vitalize the family. Hagar, on the other hand, thought her status would be upgraded, her fortune would change, and motherhood would satisfy her. Building a life through others is foolishness because we ignore people's problems and imagine our own problems, thereby inviting more problems upon ourselves. To their surprise, they inherited more problems. Before they were fairly dissatisfied. Now they were downright miserable. No one was happy when the plan succeeded. None of them were the same, sadly. It was a point of no return. Their lives were depressing. Hagar was conceited, Sarai was contentious, and Abraham was caught in the middle. Second, living a life for oneself is fighting yourself and others. Genesis chapter 16, verses 6 through 8. Hagar was fighting and hopping mad. Sarai gave her a hard time when the pregnant Hagar began to despise her mistress, in verse 4. Nothing had changed or improved. Sarai was still her owner. Things were worse than before. Sarai was now her rival, and she punished Hagar physically like never before. The matter was compounded by Abram's permission to the imperative mood. Do, imperative, with her whatever you think best. Hagar wanted to return to her pagan roots. Bible scholars tell us that Shur was a place between Beersheba and Egypt, and Hagar was midway to Egypt, Genesis chapter 16, verse 7, where she was previously regarded, treated, and sold as a slave. When the angel asked Hagar a where question, where she had come from, where she was going, Hagar responded with a who answer. I'm running away from my mistress Sarai. Hagar answered, dragging Sarai into the matter and equation. Third, living a life in God is forgiving yourself and others. Genesis chapter 16, verses 9 through 16. God told Hagar to return to her mean mistress and submit to her. Go back and submit, in verse 9, are in the imperative mood. Though trouble erupted again more than 14 years later in Genesis chapter 16, verse 15, Genesis chapter 21, verses 5 and 8, specifically when Isaac was weaned, but Ishmael was by then 16 or 17-year-old teenager. Hagar's fear that her son would be bullied was unfounded. God said to her, he will be a wild donkey of a man. His hand will be against everyone and everyone's hand against him, and he will live in hostility toward all his brothers. Genesis chapter 16, verse 12. The next time we see Ishmael, he was the one giving his half-brother Isaac a hard time. Genesis chapter 21, verse 9. In conclusion, have you turned to our Lord Jesus Christ when you are suffering, weak, and troubled? More importantly, have you asked the God of all comfort to use you to comfort those who are in trouble? 2 Corinthians chapter 1, verses 3 and 4. We have a God who looks for us. In verse 7, hears our affliction. In verse 11, and sees our needs. In verse 13.